I walked into the estate just outside Seattle, my shoes clicking against the polished stone path, and I could already hear the buzz of the party. It was my father-in-law's birthday, and the place was decked out like something from a magazine. Caterers weaving through the crowd with trays of tiny food, a tower of champagne glasses sparkling under the chandelier, and a jazz trio playing soft notes in the corner. I adjusted the tie Juliana had picked out for me that morning, feeling a little out of place, but ready to play my part. She was already inside, glowing like she always did at these things, her laughter cutting through the hum of voices. I caught sight of her across the room, surrounded by her family, her mother Claudette fussing over her hair, her brothers Reese and Marshall joking with her like she was the center of their world. She looked like a queen on her throne, and for a second, I just stood there, watching her shine. When I finally made my way over, she barely glanced at me. "Hey," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek, but she turned her head at the last second, distracted by something her cousin was saying. I stood there, hands in my pockets, waiting for her to notice me, but she didn't. The air felt heavy, and I cleared my throat. "So, where am I sitting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer, just kept talking about some story from her childhood, so her cousin handed me a little card instead. "Table 23. I frowned, flipping it over like there might be a mistake, but that was it. No name, just a number. I looked around the room, counting the tables. The main ones were inside, near the windows and the music, packed with her family and their fancy friends. Table 23 wasn't even in sight. I wandered outside, past the patio where people were sipping drinks and laughing, until I found it, tucked near the coat racks, half hidden by a row of winter jackets nobody needed in this weather. The table was small, wobbly, with a single chair that creaked when I sat down. The air was chilly out here, and I could barely hear the jazz over the clatter of the caterers moving plates around. I looked back toward the house, through the big glass doors, and saw Juliana still holding court. She caught my eye for a split second, and I thought maybe she'd wave me over, tell me it was a mix-up. Instead, she smiled, a sharp, quick thing, and shrugged. "Guess you don't count," she said, loud enough for me to hear over the noise, before turning back to her family like I wasn't even there. Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. I sat there, staring at the empty table, my hands clenched around the edges of that stupid card. It wasn't just about the seat. I'd sat through worse at her family's events, smiling like an idiot while they ignored me. But this was different. It burned. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the sting behind my eyes. I'd driven an hour to be here, brought a gift for her dad, put on this damn tie she liked, and she couldn't even pretend I mattered? I looked at her again, laughing with Reese, her hand on his arm, and something in me twisted. 7 years of marriage, and I was still the guy they stuck by the coats. The guy who didn't count. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overreacting. These things happen at big parties, right? Someone has to sit out here. But the more I sat there, the colder it got, inside and out. The caterers didn't even come this far. I'd have to flag one down if I wanted a drink. I thought about going back in, grabbing a glass of that champagne, pretending everything was fine. I'd done it before. Smile, nod, play along. But tonight, that felt impossible. Her voice echoed in my head. "Guess you don't count." And every time it replayed, it cut deeper. I wasn't just some guest who got a bad seat. I was her husband. Didn't that mean anything? I stood up, the chair scraping loud against the stone, and nobody even turned to look. Inside, the party rolled on glasses clinking, voices rising, Juliana's laugh floating above it all. I could still see her through the glass, her head thrown back, her family hanging on her every word. I waited, half expecting her to glance my way again, to see me standing there, to care. She didn't. My chest tightened, and I realized something. This wasn't a mistake. This was exactly where she wanted me, out of the way, out of sight, like I was nothing more than one of those coats hanging behind me. I grabbed my jacket from the car, the gift for her dad still tucked under my arm, and took one last look at her through the doors. She was still smiling, still shining, still not looking for me. And that was it. That was enough. I turned and walked away, the cold night air hitting my face, her words still scorching me from the inside out. I'd always been the guy who showed up, no questions asked. That's who I was, Juliana's husband, the one who smoothed things over, who kept the peace even when it cost me something. As I drove away from that fancy estate, the headlights cutting through the dark Seattle outskirts, I could still hear the jazz fading behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, and my mind kept spinning back to that table by the coat racks. It wasn't just a bad seat, it was a slap in the face, and I'd taken it like I always did. 7 years of marriage, and I'd spent most of it bending over backwards for her family. Claudette, her mom, never liked me from the start, called me that mechanic once, even though I hadn't touched a wrench in years. Reese and Marshall, her brothers, acted like I was some tag-along they had to tolerate, cracking jokes about my old car or my job like I wasn't standing right there. But I kept showing up. Every holiday, every barbecue, every awkward Sunday brunch, I was there, smiling, nodding, playing the good son-in-law. I'd bring a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford, or I'd spend an hour fixing Terrence's garage door when it jammed, my shirt stained with grease while they sat inside sipping coffee. I'd laugh at their stories, even the ones that made me feel small, because I thought that's what you do when you love someone. You take it. You prove yourself. I figured if I stuck it out long enough, they'd see me, really see me, and I'd finally belong. Juliana always said I worried too much, that her family was just like that, and I believed her. I wanted to believe her. So I'd swallow the little digs, the sidelong looks, the way they'd talk over me like I wasn't in the room. I'd tell myself it didn't matter, that I was doing it for her, for us. But tonight, sitting out there by the coats while she laughed inside, something snapped. I wasn't just swallowing it anymore. I was choking on it. The road stretched out ahead, quiet except for the hum of the engine, and I kept thinking about all those times I'd let it slide. Christmas 2 years ago, when Claudette forgot to set a place for me at the table, and I ate standing in the kitchen like it was no big deal. The 4th of July barbecue where Reese handed me a broom to sweep up after the kids, grinning like it was a favor. Marshall asking me to run to the store for ice during brunch because you're not doing anything anyway. And Juliana, she'd just watch, maybe give me a quick smile, like that was enough to make it okay. I'd always thought I was building something, earning their respect one fixed door, one forced laugh at a time. But that seat by the coat racks? That wasn't an accident. That was them telling me, loud and clear, that I'd never be more than the guy they stuck outside. I pulled into our driveway, the house dark and silent, and sat there for a minute with the engine off. The gift for Terrence, a nice leather wallet I'd spent half a paycheck on, was still on the passenger seat. I'd wrapped it myself, even wrote a little note inside about how much I admired him. What a joke. I grabbed it, my fingers digging into the paper, and stormed inside. The living room smelled like her perfume, sharp and floral, and it hit me like a reminder of everything I'd been ignoring. I tossed the gift onto the couch and sank down next to it, my head in my hands. My phone buzzed, Juliana, probably wondering where I'd gone, but I didn't look. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her little laugh as she brushed it off. It's just a party, she'd say. Don't be so sensitive. But it wasn't just a party. It was every party, every dinner, every time I'd let them treat me like I didn't matter. I thought about calling her back, telling her how it felt, really felt, to be shoved aside like that. But what would she say? She'd turn it around, make me feel like I was the one overreacting, and I'd end up apologizing like always. No, not this time. I stood up, my legs shaky but sure, and grabbed the gift again. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need their approval, their half-hearted nods, their table scraps of attention. I walked to the kitchen, ripped the wrapping off, and dropped the wallet into the trash. It hit the bottom with a soft thud, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift. I wasn't going back, not to that party, not to that role, not to the guy who smiled through it all. I'd been the good son-in-law for too long, and all it got me was a cold seat nobody else wanted. Well, they could keep it. I was done. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with Juliana's name. 5 missed calls from last night, all hers, and a string of texts piling up like little grenades. I rubbed my eyes, still groggy from a night of tossing and turning, and sat up in bed. The house felt too quiet without her. Usually she'd be humming in the kitchen or flipping through channels in the living room, but she'd stayed at her parents' place after the party. I didn't care. I liked the silence. It gave me room to think, to replay that moment by the coat racks over and over until it stopped stinging and started making sense. I'd walked out, left her there with her family, and I figured they'd barely notice. I mean, why would they? I was the guy who didn't count, right? But apparently, me leaving wasn't as invisible as I thought. I grabbed the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, and read her texts. Seriously? You're overreacting. That was the first one, sent an hour after I'd gone. Then, you embarrassed me. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The last one hit me the hardest. Oh, come on. It was just a seat. Just a seat. I stared at those words, my jaw tightening, and tossed the phone onto the bed. She didn't get it. Maybe she never would. It wasn't about the table or the cold air or the stupid coat racks. It was about her shrug, her smile, the way she'd said I didn't count like it was a fact I was supposed to accept. I'd spent years accepting it, but not anymore. I wasn't going back. Not to the party, not to her family's games, not to the life where I was just some shadow in her spotlight. I got up and shuffled to the kitchen, the floor cold under my bare feet. The trash can still had Terrence's gift in it, the leather wallet peeking out from under a coffee filter. I left it there, felt good to leave it there, and started the coffee maker. My phone buzzed again, another text, but I ignored it. I didn't want to hear her voice, real or typed, telling me I was being dramatic. She thought I'd cool off, come crawling back like I always did after her family pushed me too far. Like that time Claudette accidentally threw out the pie I'd baked for Thanksgiving, and I just shrugged it off, said it was fine. Or when Reese dented my car with his truck and laughed about it, and I didn't even ask him to pay for it. I'd always let it go, smoothed it over, because I didn't want to rock the boat. But last night, walking away from that table, I tipped the whole damn thing over, and I wasn't sorry. The coffee brewed, filling the room with that bitter smell I liked, and I poured myself a mug. I stood by the window, looking out at the gray morning, the trees dripping from last night's rain. My mind kept circling back to her texts. You embarrassed me. That one stuck. She was embarrassed? She'd paraded me out there like a stray dog they'd taken in, stuck me by the coats, and I was the one who should feel bad? I took a sip, the heat burning my tongue, and felt a laugh bubble up, sharp and rough, not the fake one I used at her family's house. She didn't even see it, did she? How she'd turned me into a joke, how they all had. I'd been so busy trying to fit in, I hadn't noticed how far out they'd pushed me. But I saw it now, clear as the steam rising from my mug. I thought about texting her back, telling her exactly what I felt, how her little shrug had cut deeper than any of Claudette's snide comments, how I was done playing the good husband while she played the princess. But I didn't. Not yet. I set the mug down, my hand steady, and realized I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't owe any of them anything. I'd spent 7 years proving myself, to her family, to myself, and all it got me was a seat nobody else wanted. I wasn't going back to that. Not to the party, sure, but not to any of it. The quiet apologies, the forced smiles, the pretending I didn't mind. I was done being the guy who took it, who stayed quiet, who let them decide my worth. The phone buzzed again, rattling against the sheets in the other room, but I stayed where I was. I could picture her now, pacing at her parents' house, complaining to Reese or Marshall about how unreasonable I was being. Maybe Claudette was there, shaking her head, saying she'd always known I wasn't good enough. Let them talk. Let them think whatever they wanted. For the first time in years, I didn't care. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it in the sink. The day stretched out ahead of me, empty in mind. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Not to her, not to that life, not to the man I'd let myself become. I'd walked out last night, and I was keeping on walking away from all of it. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Juliana. The screen flashed Gage's name, my best friend since college, the guy who'd stuck by me through everything, even when I'd started disappearing into Juliana's world. I picked up, leaning against the kitchen counter, the warmth of the mug still in my hands. Hey man, he said, his voice steady but careful, like he was testing the water. You okay? Heard you bailed on that party last night. I let out a short laugh, not sure where to start. Yeah, something like that, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. Just needed some air. He didn't push, just waited, and that's why I'd always trusted him. He knew when to listen. Then he dropped it, casual but pointed. You still want me to hold on to that folder? The folder. My stomach twisted, and I set the mug down harder than I meant to, the clink echoing in the quiet kitchen. I'd forgotten about it, buried it in the back of my mind like a bad dream I didn't want to revisit. But there it was, real as anything, sitting in Gage's office downtown. The folder wasn't just some stack of papers. It was everything I'd collected over the last year, little pieces of Juliana's secrets I'd stumbled onto and couldn't unsee. Emails I'd found on her laptop one night when she'd left it open, screenshots of flirty texts she didn't know I'd seen, credit card statements showing charges I couldn't explain, a private account she'd set up, draining our joint savings bit by bit, an affair with her Pilates instructor, some guy named Derek with a smug face I'd met once at a studio party, and the prenup violation, the one Gage had flagged when I first showed him the mess. She'd broken it clean in half, and I had the proof. Hold tight, I told him, my voice low, like I didn't want the walls to hear. But get ready. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. Gage had been my lawyer for years, handled the prenup when we got married, and when I'd started finding this stuff, he was the one I'd turn to. You sure? He said, and I could hear the weight in his words. He wasn't just asking about the folder. He was asking if I was ready to pull the trigger, to turn this into something real. I looked out the window, the gray sky pressing down on the trees, and felt that burn from last night still simmering in my chest. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. He didn't say much after that, just, okay, let me know, and a quick goodbye. But it was enough. The line went dead, and I stood there, the phone warm in my hand, my heart thumping hard. I hadn't planned on this, not really. A year ago, when I first saw those emails, I didn't know what to do. I'd sat on the couch, staring at the screen, her words to Derek glowing back at me. Miss you already. Can't wait for Thursday. My hand shook, and I'd closed the laptop like that would make it go away. I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't yell or fight or even cry. I just kept going. Kept showing up to her family's events, kept fixing things around the house, kept being the guy she expected me to be. But every time I found something new, a receipt for a hotel I'd never been to, a charge for jewelry I'd never seen, I sent it to Gage. Quietly, piece by piece, I built that folder. I didn't know why at first. Maybe I thought I'd confront her one day, or maybe I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. But now, standing in the kitchen with her text still unread on my phone, I knew what it was for. It was my way out. I walked to the living room, the carpet soft under my socks, and sank into the couch. The house felt different today. Less like ours, more like mine. Her perfume still lingered, but it didn't pull me in like it used to. I thought about last night, her shrug, her guess you don't count, and then I thought about Derek, his hands on her, her money, our money, paying for it. My money. I'd worked overtime at the warehouse, skipped lunches to save a few bucks, while she was buying him gifts and booking spa weekends. The prenup said she couldn't touch my earnings like that, not without my okay, and she'd signed it, smiling like it was nothing. I'd trusted her, and she'd played me. I picked up my phone, scrolled through her texts again. You're overreacting. It was just a seat, and deleted them. Every one. My thumb moved fast, like I was wiping away years of excuses. I didn't text her back. I didn't call Gage again either. I just sat there, the folder heavy in my mind, and let it settle. I wasn't the guy by the coat racks anymore. I wasn't the guy who'd let her family walk all over him, who'd let her lie to his face and smile about it. I had proof, cold, hard proof, and when the time was right, I'd use it. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and felt something I hadn't in years, control. For once, I wasn't waiting for her to decide what happened next. I was. 3 days after I walked out of that party, my phone rang again. This time it was Claudette. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old lawnmower I'd been meaning to fix, my hands greasy and the air thick with the smell of oil. Her name on the screen stopped me cold. She never called me, never had a reason to, and I almost didn't answer. But something made me wipe my hands on a rag and pick up. Hello, I said, keeping my voice flat. It's Claudette, she replied, sharp and clipped like always, but there was a softness underneath I wasn't used to. We'd like you to come to dinner tonight. At the house. 6 o'clock. I stood there, the rag hanging from my hand, and blinked. Dinner? With them? After everything? Why? I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my tone. She paused, then said, we need to talk. About the party. About things. Her voice wavered, and I knew this wasn't her idea. Terrence must have pushed her into it. I said I'd think about it, and hung up, my mind already racing. I didn't want to go. The thought of sitting at their table, Claudette's cold stare across from me, Reese and Marshall smirking like nothing had changed, it made my stomach turn. But then I thought about Juliana, about that folder sitting with Gage, about all the lies she'd fed me while I played the good husband. This wasn't about making peace. This was my chance to stop swallowing it, to say what I'd been holding back for years. I showered, put on a clean shirt, not the tie she liked, just something simple, and grabbed the folder from my desk. I'd kept a copy at home, just in case, and tonight it felt like a weapon in my hands. I slid it into my jacket, the weight of it pressing against my chest, and drove to their house. The whole way there, I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd look her in the eye, and let it all out. When I got there, the driveway was full. Reese's truck, Marshall's sedan, Juliana's little red car. I parked on the street, my hands tied on the wheel for a second before I got out. The house loomed ahead, all brick and big windows, the kind of place that screamed money and status. I rang the bell, and Terrence answered, his face tired but warm. "Good to see you," he said, shaking my hand like he meant it. Inside, the air smelled like roast chicken and wine, and the dining room was set up fancy. Candles flickering, plates gleaming. Juliana was there, sitting at the table, and when she saw me, she smiled, bright and fake, like she was trying to charm me back into line. "Glad you're over your little tantrum," she whispered as I sat next to her, her hand brushing my arm. She clinked her wine glass against mine, and I forced a smile back, my jaw tight. She had no idea what was coming. Claudette bustled in with a platter, Reese and Marshall trailing behind with side dishes, and we all sat down. They talked like it was normal, Terrence asking about my job, Reese cracking some dumb joke about the weather. I nodded, ate a few bites, but my mind was on the folder. Juliana kept up her act, laughing too loud, touching my shoulder like we were fine. I let her. Let them all think this was some happy little makeup dinner. The food was good, better than I expected, but it sat heavy in my stomach. I waited, picking my moment, watching their faces. Claudette looked nervous, her eyes darting to me every few minutes. Terrence seemed softer, like he felt bad. Reese and Marshall just shoveled food in, oblivious. And Juliana, she was glowing again, queen of the table, sure she'd won me over. Dinner wound down, and Claudette started talking about dessert, some pie she'd made. I didn't wait for her to finish. "Before dessert," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "we should look at this." I pulled the folder from my jacket and set it on the table, the thud loud in the sudden quiet. Everyone froze. Terrence frowned, reaching for it like it was a bill he didn't want to open. Juliana's smile slipped, her eyes narrowing. "What's that?" she asked, sharp and quick. I didn't answer, just leaned back and watched as Terrence flipped it open. The first page was a photo, grainy but clear. Juliana kissing Derek at some spa resort, her arms around his neck. Then the bank statements, the emails, the screenshots, all of it spilling out like dirty laundry. The room went silent, so still I could hear the candles flickering. Claudette's fork clattered onto her plate. Reese muttered something under his breath. Marshall just stared, mouth half open. Juliana lunged for the folder, her face red, but I grabbed her wrist, gentle but firm, and held it there. "No," I said, looking right at her. "You don't get to hide this." Her eyes widened, panicked, and she yanked her hand back. Terrence kept flipping pages, his face getting grayer with every one. "What is this?" he asked, voice low, but he already knew. Claudette clutched her napkin, her knuckles white. Juliana started to speak, some excuse, I'm sure, but I cut her off. "It's everything," I said. "Everything you thought I'd never find out." I looked around the table, at all of them, and felt the weight lift off me. They weren't in control anymore. I was, and they knew it. The dining room felt like a bomb had gone off, the silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my ears. Terrence sat there with the folder open in front of him, his hands resting on the table like he didn't know what to do with them. The photo of Juliana and Derek stared up at us, her lips on his, her hands tangled in his hair, proof she couldn't talk her way out of. I watched her from the corner of my eye, her face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She'd always been good with words, always knew how to twist things around, but not now. Not with this. I leaned back in my chair, my arms crossed, and let the moment sink in. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix things. I wasn't the one apologizing. I was the one who'd brought the truth, and it felt good, damn good, to see them all squirm. Terrence flipped to the next page, the bank statements, and his eyebrows shot up. "What's this?" he asked, his voice rough, pointing at the numbers. Thousands of dollars moved from our joint account into one I'd never seen before. "That's her private stash," I said, keeping my tone even. "She's been siphoning it off for months. Gifts for him, trips, spa days. Our money, not just hers. I nodded at the photo. That's who she spent it on. Claudette gasped, a sharp little sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Reese cursed, low and angry, shoving his plate away. Marshall just stared at the table, like he couldn't look at any of us. Juliana finally found her voice, her words tumbling out fast. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, reaching for the folder again. "It's fake, he made it up, but I was ready." I grabbed her hand, held it firm against the table, and looked her dead in the eye. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to lie anymore." She pulled back, her chair scraping loud against the floor, and glared at me like I'd betrayed her. Me. The irony almost made me laugh. Terrence kept going through the folder, screenshots of her texts to Derek, flirty little messages about meeting up, emails planning weekends away. Gage had laid it out like a map, every date and dollar tracked. "This is a lot," Terrence said, his voice shaking, and he looked at me, not her, me, like he was seeing me for the first time. "How long have you known?" I shrugged, keeping it casual even though my heart was pounding. "Long enough. Found the first email a year ago. Kept finding more. Didn't say anything till now." Claudette's head snapped up. "A year," she said, like she couldn't believe it. "And you just sat on it?" I met her eyes, cold and steady. "Yeah, I was waiting." "Yes, I do count." "Huh?" "Especially when you thought I wasn't paying attention." Juliana flinched at that, her hands twisting in her lap. She hated this, hated being caught, hated losing the spotlight. She'd always been the golden one, the perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong. And I'd been the quiet one, the guy who fixed the garage door and smiled through her family's crap, the guy she could count on to stay invisible. Not tonight. I watched her squirm, her perfect world cracking right there at the table, and I didn't feel sorry. Not one bit. She built this mess, her and Derek and all those lies, and now she had to sit in it. Terrence closed the folder, slow and deliberate, and pushed it away like it burned him. "Juliana," he said, his voice low and hard, "what the hell were you thinking?" She didn't answer, just stared at the table, her lips pressed tight. Claudette jumped in, her voice shrill. "There's got to be an explanation." She wouldn't, but Terrence cut her off. "Stop," he said, holding up a hand. "He's got proof. Dates, times, money. It's all here." He looked at me again, his eyes tired but sharp. "You didn't deserve this." That hit me harder than I expected. Terrence, big, gruff Terrence, who'd barely said 10 words to me in 7 years, saying that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Reese muttered something else, too quiet to catch, and Marshall shifted in his seat, looking like he wanted to bolt. Juliana stayed silent, her face pale now, the fight draining out of her. I could have kept going, could have told them about the late nights she'd come home smelling like someone else's cologne, the way she'd laugh off my questions like I was paranoid. But I didn't need to. The folder said it all. I'd spent a year collecting it, a year pretending I didn't see, and now it was out. They couldn't ignore it, couldn't shrug it off like they did me. I looked at Juliana, her head bowed, and felt the burn from that night by the coat racks flare up again. "Guess I do count," I said again, quieter this time, but it landed like a hammer. She didn't look up. Nobody did. The truth was out, and it wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was hers. The air in that dining room felt like it could snap, every breath heavy with what I just dropped on the table. The folder sat there, closed now, but its shadow stretched across every face, Terrence's gray and drawn, Reese's tight with anger, Marshall's blank like he was still processing. Juliana wouldn't look up, her hands knotted in her lap, her perfect mask cracked wide open. I sat back, my arms crossed, watching it all unfold like I was outside my own body. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to smooth things over, to make it okay for everyone else. I'd laid out the truth, her affair, her lies, her theft, and I wasn't taking it back. Then Claudette stood up, her chair scraping loud against the hardwood, and her voice broke the silence like a whip. This has to be fake," she said, her hand shaking as she pointed at the folder. "You can't just come in here and ruin everything with some made-up nonsense." Her words hung there, sharp and desperate, and I almost felt bad for her, almost. She'd spent years treating me like dirt, and now she was clinging to the idea that her precious daughter couldn't do wrong. I didn't say anything, just watched her, my face calm, letting her dig her own hole. Terrence turned to her, slow and steady, his eyes hard. "He brought proof, Claudette," he said, his voice low but firm. "What did we ever bring him?" That stopped her cold. She blinked, her mouth half open, like she couldn't believe he'd turned on her. I couldn't either, honestly. Terrence had never stood up for me, not once in 7 years, and now here he was, calling it like he saw it. Claudette sank back into her chair. Her napkin crumpled in her fist, and the room went quiet again. Juliana shifted, her head still down, and I could feel her wanting to run. She hated this, hated being the one under the spotlight when it wasn't flattering her. She'd always controlled the story, spun every little thing to make herself shine. The affair? She'd probably call it a misunderstanding if I gave her the chance. The money? A mistake she'd blame on the bank. But not today. Today, I held the reins, and she couldn't charm her way out. I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman I'd married, the one I loved so hard I'd let myself disappear, and saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. Her hair was perfect, her dress pressed, but her eyes were wild, darting like a trapped animal. Say something, I said, my voice steady, daring her to try. She didn't, just pressed her lips tighter and stared at the table. Claudette tried again, weaker this time. Terrence, you can't believe this. He's lying. But he shook his head, slow and tired. It's not about believing him, he said. It's about what's right here. He tapped the folder, his fingers heavy on it. Dates, pictures, money. It's not a lie when it's on paper. Reese cursed again, louder this time, and shoved his chair back like he couldn't stand sitting there anymore. Marshall stayed put, his hands flat on the table, but his knuckles were white. They didn't know what to do. None of them did. For years, they'd treated me like I was nothing, and now I'd turned their whole world upside down. I didn't feel triumph, exactly, just a quiet, solid thing in my chest, like I'd finally stood up after being knocked down too many times. Juliana's head snapped up then, her eyes wet but burning. You're ruining everything, she hissed at me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You think this makes you better? I leaned in, close enough to smell her perfume, and kept my voice just as low. No, I said. It makes me free. Her face twisted, like she wanted to slap me, but she didn't move. She knew she'd lost the room. Terrence was still staring at the folder, Claudette was crumbling, and her brothers, well, they weren't jumping to her defense like they usually did. She was alone, and I could see it eating at her. She'd built her life on being the center, the one everyone adored, and now every eye at that table was burning through her, not with love, but with something else. Disappointment, anger, disgust. I sat back again, letting the silence do the rest. Claudette started to cry, soft, choked sounds she tried to hide with her napkin. Terrence reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her shoulders shaking. How could you? She whispered, and I wasn't sure if she meant me or Juliana. Maybe both. Reese paced by the window, muttering to himself, and Marshall finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a second before dropping again. Juliana stayed still, her hands trembling now, and I knew she felt it. The shift, the fracture. Her perfect world, the one where I stayed quiet and let her shine, had shattered right there on that table. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and it wasn't my mess to clean up anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like I wasn't just the guy by the coat racks, but the guy who'd finally walked away from them all. The dining room was a mess of tension, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes every sound feel too loud. Claudette's crying had quieted to little sniffles, her napkin a soggy ball in her hands, and Reese had stopped pacing, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed like he didn't know where to put his anger. Marshall still sat at the table, staring at his plate like it might tell him what to do next. Juliana hadn't moved. Her hands were in her lap, her face pale, her eyes fixed on some spot on the tablecloth. The folder was still there, closed but looming, and I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle over me. It wasn't loud or dramatic anymore, just heavy, real, and final. Then Terrence cleared his throat, breaking the silence, and looked at me with those tired, steady eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough but clear. We were wrong about you. I didn't expect that. 7 years of marriage, and Terrence had barely given me more than a nod or a grunt. Now he was apologizing? I blinked, my mouth dry, and nodded back, not sure what to say. He kept going, his hands resting on the table like he was anchoring himself. I mean it, he said. You didn't deserve this, not from her, not from us. I should have seen it sooner. Claudette made a small, choked sound, like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Reese shifted by the wall, his jaw tight, and Marshall glanced up, his face uncomfortable but quiet. Juliana didn't react, just sat there, a statue of herself, like she was waiting for someone to fix this for her. But nobody did. Terrence leaned forward, his voice softer now. She took a lot from you, money, time, trust. I'll cover it. What she stole. It's the least I can do. That hit me harder than the apology. Money? I hadn't even thought about that part. Not really. The folder was about showing them who she was, not about getting anything back. I shook my head, slow and firm. No, I said, meeting his eyes. This isn't about money. It's about respect. His eyebrows lifted, just a little, and he nodded like he understood. Fair enough, he said, sitting back. But the offer's there. I appreciated it, more than I'd admit, but I didn't need their cash to feel whole again. I'd already taken back something bigger, something they couldn't buy. Claudette wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. Terrence, you can't just— He held up a hand, cutting her off. Enough, he said, and she went quiet, her lips trembling. Juliana moved then, pushing her chair back with a loud scrape, and stood up. Her eyes were wet, her cheeks red, and she looked around the table like she was waiting for someone to stop her. Nobody did. I can't do this, she muttered, her voice cracking, and she walked out fast, her heels clicking down the hall. I heard the front door open and slam shut, the sound echoing through the house. For a second, I thought Claudette might go after her. She half rose, her hand reaching out, but Terrence touched her arm, and she sank back down. Reese swore under his breath, kicking the wall lightly, and Marshall rubbed his face with both hands. They were cracking, all of them. Juliana's perfect little family, the one that always rallied around her, was breaking apart right in front of me. And for the first time, her tears didn't pull anyone in. I stayed where I was, watching it happen. 7 years, and I'd seen them close ranks around her every time, birthdays, fights, even the little stuff like when she dented my car and blamed me. They'd laugh it off, pet her head, tell me to lighten up. But not now. Now, they just sat there, stunned and silent, like they didn't know how to move forward. Terrence looked at me again, his face softer than I'd ever seen it. I was wrong, he said again, quieter this time. I thought you were. I don't know. Less. But you're not. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. It wasn't just words, it was him seeing me, really seeing me, after all this time. Reese and Marshall didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Their silence said enough. Reese's fists were clenched, his eyes on the floor, and Marshall's shoulders were slumped, like he was carrying something heavy. They'd never liked me, never hid it, but now they couldn't look at me. Guilt, maybe, or just shock. I didn't care. They weren't my problem anymore. Claudette sniffled again, her hands twisting that napkin, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She'd spent years freezing me out, and now her golden girl was the one falling apart. I stood up, my chair creaking, and grabbed my jacket from the back of it. I should go, I said, keeping my voice steady. Terrence nodded, standing too. Take care, he said, and he shook my hand, firm, real, not the half-hearted grip he'd given me before. I walked out, the cool night air hitting my face as I stepped onto the porch. Juliana's car was gone, the driveway empty where it had been. I didn't know where she went, and I didn't care. The family I'd tried so hard to fit into was fracturing, and I wasn't the one holding it together anymore. I got in my car, the folder still in my jacket, and drove home. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, like I'd left something behind in that house, something I didn't need to carry anymore. The next morning came fast, the sun sneaking through the blinds and hitting me square in the face. I rolled out of bed, my body stiff from a night of half-sleep, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. Last night at Terrence's house had changed everything, and I wasn't turning back. I made coffee, the machine gurgling in the quiet kitchen, and stood there with the mug in my hands, replaying it all. Juliana's face when I dropped the folder, Claudette's collapse, Terrence's apology, it felt like a dream, but it wasn't. It was real, and it was done. By the time the coffee was cool enough to drink, I knew what I had to do. I called Gage, told him to file the divorce papers, and he didn't hesitate. I'll get it done today, he said, his voice steady. Quiet, no fuss, just like you wanted. I thanked him and hung up, feeling that weight lift a little more. I didn't waste time. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, typed up a quick email to my boss asking for a few days off, and hit send. Then I started packing, not much, just enough to get me out of this house that still smelled like her. A couple shirts, some jeans, my toothbrush. I tossed them into a duffel bag and left the rest. The bedroom was hers anyway, all her clothes and perfumes and little trinkets. I didn't want any of it. By noon, Gage texted me, papers are served. She's got them. I pictured her opening the envelope, her hand shaking, her eyes scanning the pages, and I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't take long. She called 10 minutes later, her name flashing on the screen, and I let it ring twice before picking up. "Hey," I said, keeping it flat, like we were talking about the weather. "What is this?" she said, her voice high and tight, like she was holding back a screen. "Divorce papers? Are you serious?" I leaned against the counter, the duffel bag at my feet, and took a slow breath. "Yeah," I said. "I'm serious." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't match her. "You're throwing away 7 years over what? Some stupid seat? A few mistakes." I almost laughed back, but I didn't. "It's not about the seat," I said. "It's about you. The affair. The money. The lies. I'm done, Juliana." She went quiet, and I could hear her breathing, fast and uneven. "It was just a mistake," she said finally, softer now, like she was trying to pull me back in. "We can fix this. Please, just come home. We'll talk." I closed my eyes, picturing her standing in her parents' house, maybe in that big living room with the fancy rugs, begging me to give her another chance. Part of me, the old me, wanted to say yes, to drive over there and let her smooth it over like she always did. But that guy was gone. "No," I said, my voice firm. "There's nothing to fix. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." She started to cry then, little sobs that cracked through the phone, and I felt a pang in my chest, but it didn't change anything. "Wait," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just wait. We can work it out." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "I've waited long enough," I said. "Goodbye, Juliana." I hung up before she could say more, my thumb pressing the button hard, and the silence that followed was loud and final. I grabbed the duffel bag and walked out, locking the door behind me. The house wasn't mine anymore, not really, and I didn't look back as I got in the car. I drove to Gage's office first, dropped off the keys so he could handle whatever came next, and then headed to a motel a few miles out of town. It was cheap, clean enough, with a bed and a TV I wouldn't use. I tossed the bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress, my hands resting on my knees. My phone buzzed, her again, a text this time. "Please reconsider. I love you." I stared at it, my thumb hovering, and then deleted it. She'd said those words 1,000 times, but they didn't mean anything now, not after Derek. Not after the money, not after that shrug by the coat racks. Love wasn't enough when it came with all that. Later that day, she showed up at my office, or tried to. I wasn't there, but my coworker texted me, "Your wife's here, looking for you. Seems upset." I didn't reply. Let her look. Let her beg. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't running back either. By evening, I'd found a small apartment online, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a view of some trees, and put in an application. The motel would do for now, but I needed a place that was mine, not ours. I lay back on the bed, the springs creaking under me, and stared at the ceiling. She'd gone pale on that call. I could hear it, pale and small, like she'd finally realized I meant it. "Wait," she'd said, but I didn't. I couldn't. I'd given her 7 years of waiting, 7 years of being less, and I was done. The room was quiet, the hum of the heater the only sound, and I felt something settle in me, peace, maybe, or close to it. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't sad. I was just free. She'd try again. I knew it, more calls, more tears, but it wouldn't change my mind. I'd filed the papers, walked away, and now I was building something new. Not for her, not for them, but for me. It's been a month now since everything fell apart, or maybe since it all came together, depending on how I look at it. I'm standing in my new apartment, a small place I moved into last week, washing dishes from last night's dinner in the kitchen sink. The water's warm, the soap suds piling up, and the morning light cuts through the window, hitting the scratched-up counter just right. It's not a big space, just a bedroom, a living room with a second-hand couch, and this little kitchen, but it feels like home already. Last weekend, I had Gage and his wife, Lisa, over for dinner. I cooked spaghetti, tossed some sauce from a jar over it, and managed not to burn the garlic bread. I set the table myself, 3 plates, 3 chairs, no extra spots, no coat racks anywhere near it. We ate, laughed about old college stories, and drank cheap wine until the bottle was empty. It was simple, easy, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. I rinse a plate, the water splashing soft against my hands, and think about how I got here. That night at the party feels like a lifetime ago, the jazz, the champagne, Juliana's shrug when she stuck me by the coat racks. Guess you don't count, she'd said, and I'd swallowed it, like I'd swallowed everything else for 7 years. Her family's cold looks, her brother's jabs, her mother's way of talking like I wasn't even there. I took it all because I thought that's what you do when you're married. You bend, you fit, you make it work. But sitting out there in the cold, watching her laugh inside like I didn't exist, something broke. I'd been furniture to them, something they moved around, ignored, used when it suited them. And I'd let them. I'd let her. Until I didn't. The dish towel's rough as I dry my hands, and I lean against the counter, looking out at the trees swaying in the breeze. I learned something that night, something I wish I'd figured out sooner. People treat you how you let them. Juliana didn't think I'd leave, didn't think I'd push back. Her family didn't either. They built this world where she was the star, and I was the guy who stayed quiet, who fixed the garage door and smiled through their crap. But when I stood up, when I walked out, when I dropped that folder on the table and showed them who she really was, they panicked. Wait, she'd said, over and over, like it'd pull me back to that seat, back to being invisible. But I didn't wait. I left. And now I'm here, in a place I built myself, where nobody gets to shove me aside. I grab my coffee mug, the chipped one I've had since before her, and step onto the tiny balcony. The air's cool, the sky gray but soft, and I wrap my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink in. The divorce is done, filed and finalized faster than I expected. Gage served the papers that morning after the dinner, and Juliana fought it at first, called me, showed up at my work, begged me to fix this. She'd stood there in the warehouse parking lot, her eyes red, her voice shaking. It was a mistake, she'd said. We can still be us. But I'd shaken my head, told her I was done, and walked away. She signed eventually, once she saw I wasn't budging, and the prenup held. I kept my savings, what was left of it, and let her go. I didn't want her money, didn't take Terrence's offer to cover what she stole. I just wanted out, and I got it. She's back with her parents now, or so Gage heard. But I don't check. I don't need to know. The coffee's strong, a little bitter, and I take a sip, watching a bird flip between the branches outside. I think about that dinner with Gage and Lisa, how I set the table, how we sat together, how nobody was stuck outside or forgotten. Every guest had a seat, and I made sure of it. That's what I've built here, a table where I decide who sits, where I'm not begging for a place. For years, I'd shrunk myself to fit her world, to fit their idea of me. I'd show up, play nice, take the scraps they tossed my way, because I thought it made me a good husband. But it didn't. It made me a ghost. Now, I'm solid, real, and I'm not going back to being less. I finished the coffee, set the mug on the railing, and stretched my arms out, feeling the morning chill on my skin. They say wait, when they realize you're leaving. Juliana did, her voice cracking like she could reel me in. But you don't have to listen. You can leave. You can build your own table, set it how you want, and make sure every seat's one of honor, including your own. I did that. This apartment, this life, it's mine, scratched up floors and all. I head back inside, rinse the mug, and leave it by the sink. The day's open, work later, maybe a walk after, and it's mine to fill. No coat racks, no shrugs, no waiting. Just me at my own table, where I count most of all.